everybody. I'd like to welcome Leslie Jordan here to Google. He's nominated for an Emmy. Let's congratulate him on that.
Yay!
He also has a show that's playing at the Lorraine Hansberry Theater in San Francisco, and it is ending this weekend. And if you would like to go, there's a discount if you want to go to Sunday night show.
Sunday afternoon.
Sunday afternoon.
It's 2:30.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All right, well, at this point, I'm just going to turn it over to Leslie. Leslie Jordan, everybody.
Hey. Some of you might know me from a television series, the one that I got the Emmy nomination for, Will and Grace. Well, Karen Walker. I thought I smelled gin and regret. Some of you might know me. I have this movie that's really popular in the Bay Area that I did with Olivia Newton-John years ago called Sordid Lives. Has anyone seen Sordid Lives? You should go out and rent Sordid Lives. In Sordid Lives, I play a man in the mental hospital who thinks he's Tammy Wynette. And he busts out of the mental hospital and he shows up at his mama's funeral in this very conservative little Texas town in full drag, and shenanigans ensue. So I'm very proud of that. Some of you may know me from Boston Legal, which is a TV show that I work on quite a bit, where Betty White, I murder my mother, and then they get me off, and then I murder the neighbor, and they get me off, and then Betty White murders me with a skillet. But what you may not know and what my show is about is that I am the gayest man I know. You know, people ask me all the time, they say, Leslie, when did you come out? And I think, come out? Well, one had to have been in, you know, to come out. I sort of fell out of the womb and landed in my mother's high heels, and I have been on the prance ever since. My daddy was a lieutenant colonel in the Army, and I was not exactly the son he envisioned. He used to call me son as if he was in deep pain. He would just say, "Oh, son." Because I wanted, one of my earliest aspirations, I wanted to be, y'all are way too young. This is a young company. I cannot believe how young this company is, which is really exciting, but I feel like somebody's sugar daddy or something like that. But there was a show on television years ago called Hullabaloo, which was sort of like way before MTV, and it featured these go-go dancers up on these white cubes. And I decided when I was about 6 or 7 that was what I wanted to be when I grew up, was a go-go dancer. And so I would get up I would push all the furniture back in the living room, and I would get up on the coffee table, and I would practice. And my poor dad would come home with his Army buddies, and his firstborn son would be go-go. My favorite was Wipeout by the Safaris. Y'all are probably way too young to remember that, but da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But then my mom was this really, really sweet Southern belle. I think my mother and my grandmother took one look at little Leslie, and they thought, oh, he's going to need some help. And so my mother and my grandmother created this secret garden where it was okay for little boys to play with dolls. It was okay for little boys to read Trixie Belden and Nancy Drew instead of the Hardy Boys. It was okay for little boys to sew doll clothes and make pot holders. I was very artistic. But so this little boy was allowed to do whatever he wanted, except, we just didn't tell Daddy. Now, my mom was this champion baton twirler who thought nothing of getting her 7-year-old son out in the front yard with a baton in the middle of summer, and we would practice. And I was really good. I could throw it under my legs. I could spin. I could catch it. So there I am just going to town with my little baton, and my dad comes pulling up with all of his Army buddies. And I remember my dad would just say, "Oh, son." I had this really, really high, squeaky voice, and I used to holler, "Daddy, Daddy, watch me twirl," while I paraded around the front yard. But anyway, my dad would say, "Son, why don't you twirl in the house?" And I said, "Well, Mama's scared I'll break something." He said, "I will pay for whatever you break." But you know what? I do a lot of talking around the country. I do, it's kind of, I don't want to call it new agey talks, but you know what I'd like to talk a little bit about today is how you measure your success. Because I'm in this industry. First of all, 8 years ago, I got 2 DUIs in 1 year, and I was sentenced. They have very, very tough, DUI laws in Southern California, and I was sentenced to 120 days in the Twin Towers, which is this horrible. If any of you have any problems with drinking, you want to get sober, a little time in the Twin Towers will help, trust me. It's no place for someone 4'11". But anyway, I got sober about 8 years ago. I was very popular in the Twin Towers. But I think it's not why you think. It's more because I'm a big talker and everybody's so bored there. But anyway, I just decided that the jig was up. I was a product of the 1960s, smoking a lot of pot and taking acid, and then all of a sudden it was the 70s, and here we were in our platform, Elton John platform shoes, taking Quaaludes and going to discotheques, and then it's the 80s, and it was making a whole lot of money and doing a whole lot of cocaine, and then it was just the 90s, and I was just a mess. And I kept this career afloat during all of it. But all of a sudden, I'm 42 years old, and I'm completely sober, and I was having a really, really hard time measuring, was I a success? And it's a lot like this industry. You have people on one end of the scale making millions of dollars, like your Tom Cruises and your Jim Carreys, and then 85% of my union on the other end earns less than $10,000 a year. That's what you have to earn to get your insurance. And so 85% of my union. So I was having this really hard time, just like in this industry, you have people, you have the Sergeys and what's his name, making the trillions of dollars on that end of the spectrum. And then you have people that are the 9-to-5ers, And how do you measure, am I a success at what I do? Especially with me, because I worked all the time, but I never ever felt. One thing I think people who have addiction problems like I did, we have a disease of more, and it's just never enough. I could be Madonna in front of a huge, huge crowd, and I never feel like it's enough. I'm addicted to attention. I'm addicted to anything. Anything you throw my way that makes me feel good, I'm addicted to. But anyway, so I had this really wise spiritual advisor, which is what we have in LA. We have spiritual advisors. But I had this spiritual advisor. I kept asking him, do you think, how do I measure my success? How do I measure my success when you've got some people making millions of dollars, and then I'm on this other end of the spectrum where I work. I'm a working actor, and it's slowly. I've been in this business. In 1982, I stepped off a bus from the hills of Tennessee. I couldn't even afford Greyhound. It was Trailways, which is not even, you don't even have Trailways anymore. And I had $1,200 sewn into my underpants, and I had this tiny little suitcase, and I had these huge dreams, and that was 1982. Well, it's now, 3 years later, and it's all kind of starting to come to fruition. But even now, am I success? They say, okay, you're nominated for an Emmy. Well, what about an Oscar? That's just where my mind goes. But something really interesting happened. My spiritual advisor said to me, you know what, do you have a job coming up? And I said, yeah, I do. I have a job coming up. I'm on Carolyn in the City, and it's a 5-episode arc, and I play the marriage counselor, the marriage therapist. And he said, I want you just to try something for me. And this is going to sound so new agey, woo-hoo-hoo, but I'm telling you, it worked for me. He said, I want you to show up at that job to be of service. And not just to be of service, but to be of loving service. And I thought, oh, please. But I tried that. I went to work on this Carolyn in the City, and I showed up, and he said, I want you to be of service to the producer, okay? He has a budget. That means you're on time. You show up, you have your lines learned. I want you to be of service to the director of the, it's not your vision, darling. It's not your vision, it's his vision. You have these actors that want to come in and He said, you are just to be of service to his vision. Then you're to be of service to your fellow actors. You're 4'11", you have that southern accent and those big ears. It's real easy for you to steal the scene, until I met Megan Mullally from Will and Grace. And I'm telling you, that bitch, I love her to death. She's the most brilliant comedian. No matter what I threw her way, she hurled it back at me faster, higher, funnier. I have met my match, you know. There's no scene stealing from Miss Megan Mullally. But anyway, he said to me, why don't you show up and just be of service? And you know, the most amazing thing happened with that tiny little tweak where it wasn't so much about me anymore. It wasn't so much, even in audition situations now, when I walk into an audition situation, I'm not so driven like, oh my God, what can I get from this? If I get this job, what am I going to get paid? If I get this job, it was more, you know what, here I am. I'd love to be of service. This is what I can bring to the table. You know, this is what I can bring to the table. And I tell you, the most amazing thing happened. In the last 8 years, I have been so successful. Directors hire me time and time again because I don't make waves. I just show up. I do my job. You know, I'm on time. I've got my lines learned. I don't steal scenes from other actors. And this really amazing thing has happened where I'm now, at the end of each job, you know, I ask myself, was I of service? Did I, you know, what did I bring to the table? And I'm a success. I'm a huge, huge, huge success. And it was something just that simple, you know, in my mind. But I have, it's just amazing. You wake up one morning and all of a sudden you think to yourself, I am living the life that I always dreamed of living. It was just amazing. I've got this Emmy nomination. There's a new series that's going to be on HBO that Linda Bloodworth Thomason wrote, who wrote Designing Women, called 12 Miles of Bad Road, which I just love the title right there, 12 Miles of Bad Road. And it's going to be kind of like the white trash version of The Sopranos. It's because you have that in the South. When I talked to her about it, I said, that's brilliant, because every little Southern town has what they call the cornbread mafia, some little family that runs the show, you know, like you see in the movies, you know. But I've got that. I just did this, the guy that did Dawson's Creek, Kevin Williamson, who's a good friend of mine, has written a wonderful new pilot called Hidden Palms. The UPN and the WB are merging into this new network called the CW, and I'm working on that right now. We just did the pilot, and I've got that coming up. I've got my one-man show, but I really would love for you guys to come. We're going to offer a Google discount. I'm not sure how to work, but my website is brotherboy.com, BROTHERBOY, Brotherboy, brotherboy.com, and you go to the website.
Yeah, and when you go to buy tickets, you put a coupon code. I'm not going to write this down.
Google.
Call the box office. Courtney knows that's good for $10 off per ticket for Sunday afternoon performance at 2:30.
But I want to thank you for welcoming me into your world. We ate for free. I thought that's a bulimic's delight. Just go through there and whoa, and go again. I've never seen anything like that. And everybody's so young and happy. Do they give you drugs? Is that it? Are we? Yeah. Is that it? Some of the happy stuff that they put in the food. But you welcomed me into your world. Do you have any questions about acting, or anybody have any questions? Because I'm kind of out of material. I mean, I'm keep tap dancing, but if anybody has any questions, I'd love to. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, step up to the mic.
I'll start off with a silly question.
Okay.
I'm wondering if you could comment on the demise of Beverly Leslie. Do you think it was a fitting ending for him, or is there a chance he survived?
Well, the question was about Beverly Leslie, which was my character. I'll tell you, on Will and Grace, that character was written for Joan Collins, believe it or not. What? But they had written this episode where Joan Collins was going to steal Rosario away from Karen Walker. And then they wanted a dynasty bitch fight across a billiard table where they pulled each other's wigs off. So they did the table read, which is the first day. We come in to a brand new script on Wednesday morning because we shoot in front of a live audience on Tuesday nights. So we come in on Wednesday morning to this brand new script, and we just sit, and I've figured out what the success to that show is. Those four characters who, by the way, people want dish and dirt. I have none. They are four of the nicest people. You know, I've known them for all these years. I've watched them get really famous. I've watched them get really rich. Yes, we're talking like $700,000 a week they were making, near the end. And they haven't changed at all. But you know what I noticed in that table read was that nothing matters except making the other of those four laugh. It's like this little, there's in that situation, it's really high stress. There's 50 people in suits. I don't know who they are. It's like here. How could it take, I just had this vision of Google where maybe when you Google something, one of you guys grabs it and runs and finds it or something. I thought, because I have no idea how it works. Even MapQuest just floors me. I thought they must just have someone with Thomas guides. But there's all this pressure, and those four, just all they care about is making each other laugh. But they did this table read with Joan Collins, and then her entourage left, and someone came back and said, there's one thing that Miss Collins will not allow. You cannot pull her wig off. Now, my theory is she had just done this movie called These Old Broads that Carrie Fisher wrote, and Debbie Reynolds, all these old movie stars got their wigs pulled off. Debbie Reynolds got her wigs pulled off, and y'all are like, who? Y'all are sitting there like, who? Debbie who? She was an old movie star named Debbie Reynolds. Shirley MacLaine got her wig pulled off. Who's the fourth one? Debbie Reynolds, Shirley MacLaine. Oh, Elizabeth Taylor got her wig pulled off. But anyway, so Joan Collins said, you can't pull my wig off. So they fired her. They told her, well, fine, bye-bye. So my agent called me, and he said, they've made the character. They want Southern. They want kind of fey, they want, and I said, well, so my mother, who's such a character, called me that morning. I was on the way to the audition, and John Ritter, who was a dear friend of mine, I did a series with him years ago where I played a little Southern lawyer, and it was called Hearts of Fire, and I had a little white suit, like a little linen white suit, and I put on my little white linen suit, and I was on the way out the door, and my phone rang, and my mother said, Leslie, Wanda Slane has been shot. And I said, who? She said, Wanda Slane from church. She got shot. And I said, Mother, I'm on my way to a really important audition. I don't know who you're talking about. She said, oh, that woman had that little baby out of wedlock, and it looked like a pig. And she'd put bows on it and little socks and bring it to church, and we didn't know how to act. It looked just like a little baby pig. I said, Mother, I've got to go. So I walked into this audition in my white suit, and I was late, and I said, I'm really sorry, but my phone rang, and my mother said, Wanda Slane has been shot. I told them that story, and they just sat there, and they go, you're it. You're it. So I got that. We did one episode, and then we did, but back to the original question, I was so honored because I did years. It got to where they sort of trotted me out like this aging show pony. I wouldn't do every episode, but they would trot me out for the big ones. So I got to work with J-Lo. I got to work with Matt Damon, Alec Baldwin, Matt Lauer. Oh. I'm the founder and the guiding light of the Matt Lauer fan club for middle-aged gay men. I bet y'all didn't know that. But anyway, I got to do, I'll tell you a funny story about Matt Lauer. It's kind of off color. Let me see. We had a line on Will and Grace when we would shoot. People think we were improvising, but I learned a long time ago, film is a director's medium, stage is an actor's medium, television is a writer's medium. I learned a long time ago, if you go into an audition for television, you speak those words as written because they have 12 people around a table that have worked all night long on those words, but anyway, we shoot the script as written and then in front of the audience, and then they progressively come in and make it bawdier to try to keep the audience, and then we always do one that's filthy where and that's sometimes the one that gets on the air. But we had this scene where the Eric McCormick character forgot his pants, and he's walking out of the room, and he ducks right back in, and he says, in case anybody's wondering, Beverly Leslie comes right to my penis. That was the line. And then Deborah, we get this script, and then Deborah's line was, so basically you just teabagged a dwarf. That was the line that was written. So of course, when we delivered it in the what we have what's called a producer's run through. The censor just about shit and fell back in it. I mean, he said, no, whoa, no. Teabag can be a noun. Teabag cannot be used as a verb. Well, Matt Lauer was standing next to me, and he said to me, is that a term that is popular enough? And I said, well, you know, it's like you take your balls and you put it in. He goes, no, I know what the term means. He said, what I'm asking is it a popular enough term that people would get the joke? I was so embarrassed. But I thought now if I ever get on Good Morning America or whatever it is he works on, I could tell him I taught Matt Lauer about teabagging. But okay, back to the question. They've called me up to do the finale, the big finale, and I was so honored. I mean, they've had Elton John, Cher, Jay. I mean, they've had every huge star in the world. But they said, no. The big ending is going to be the four, Rosario and you. And I thought, wow. And then my manager called and he said, now listen, I was in Atlanta doing a play. And my manager said, it's all cool. You know, they're going for the deal and we've got everything ready to sign. But they're not going to fly you in. And I said, I have to pay for my own airplane ticket? He said, yeah. I said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. He said, Leslie, come on. This is television history. I said, they pay them $700,000 a week and they cannot spring for an airline ticket to fly me back? But anyway, I did it. I mean, come on. I Googled and got on Expedia, whatever it is. And I got me this cheap flight and flew home. But I will tell you this, and I'll end with this because I know you'll have to go back to work. For those that did not see the ending, I fly out the window. A gust of wind just carries me away, and that's it. I just blow out the window, and that was the end of Beverly Leslie. So they strapped me in this big sort of John Paul Gaultier, this straps, and Google that in case you don't know, John Paul Gaultier. Anyway, they had me in this harness like Tinkerbell where I could fly, you know. And we rehearsed it a couple of times and it worked. Well, we got in front of an audience and I don't know if they pulled the lever too fast or what, but I flew out that. I flew so fast my shoes stayed on the ground. It pulled me out of my shoes. There was Beverly Leslie's velvet opera slippers, which was kind of funny, but it just pulled me out of my shoes. Well, it flew me. I was literally 30, 40 feet up in the air above. Now here's, this would be like, you've worked somewhere like Google for 8 years, you know everybody, and this is the last day. It was the last shot of the night. It was the ending of Will and Grace forever and ever and ever. And I'm floating. And this weird thing happened. It was like this out-of-body experience. I'm just floating above everybody. And here is Deborah Messing. And and everything went kind of muffled. And you see everybody clapping. It was almost like slow motion. And then all of a sudden it just went, zoom! And I was back in real time and they lowered me. Well, I thought it was very spiritual, and I have this sister that's very pragmatic. And I called her and I said, you're never going to believe what happened. I just floated. She goes, the blood rushed to your head. I said, no, I floated above everyone. And it was like, like God saying, she goes, the blood rushed to your head. But that was the end of Beverly Leslie. And do y'all have to go back to work? Do you work? I mean, what do you do? Any more questions? Maybe one more question from anybody? If not, I'll take on out of here. No? Well, listen, thank you so much for having me. Bye-bye. Is that what you wanted? Okay, good. Great. Thank you. Yeah, come see me Sunday. You type in Google, Brother Boy, type in Google, and you get a big discount.